Gitmo, about 7-8 months later after the war, I was rewarded with orders to Guantanamo by myself, a unaccompanied tour. I started experiencing intermittent blurry vision. I get it to this day. My left eye would be very blurry today and uncorrectable even with glasses. And the next day it would be fine, and maybe my right eye. It's intermittent blurry vision. I was never able on active duty to resolve that or diagnose it, but when I went to the VA in 95 after I retired, they diagnosed it as ophthalmic migraine, which I don't get headaches, but I get these vision changes that happen all the time. I also at Guantanamo began experiencing very intense itching on my forearms. Long story short, they did everything. They couldn't figure out what it was. They did look for fungus and everything else. I think it was a nerve problem, and I get those things to this day, this weird, intense itching. And if I don't scratch it, it's not even, it doesn't, looks normal. But it's itching like crazy. It's a nerve problem, I guarantee you. Bladder. Okay, right after, down at Guantanamo, I started experiencing trouble initiating urination. First thing, obviously, they're going to check the prostate, okay? My prostate is fine to this day. I've had more of those tests than I want to remember. It's the bladder muscle. In 93, 2 years after the war, I underwent an operation to correct what they thought was a tight bladder neck. They did an incision in there, and it did not resolve the problem. To this day, I have that same problem, and it is a problem concentrating. I have to sit down when I urinate because I have a hard time getting started, and I have to really, it's like you have to go into a trance to urinate, and then when I get started, it's a very slow flow, and it'll stop, and then if I lose my concentration, it's a nerve problem. I guarantee you, my bladder has nerve problems. Okay, the vision problems continued, and then in 95, the year I retired, I noticed that my senses, my alertness, I call it like mental numbness. I felt like I was inside my body looking out. It's very hard to describe. I went to a neurologist, and I was stumbling and walking very awkwardly. I just didn't feel alert, and I was not on any drugs. I went to a neurologist. He prescribed Lamictal, and it helped significantly to resolve the coordination problems and my alertness. I didn't stay on it for a long period of time, but during the time I was on it, it did help. Problem is, my problems got worse. I started experiencing, and after I retired in 95, I'm still running 3 miles 3 times a week. I'm doing upper body work at the gym at LA Air Force Base. I was still a Marine in my mind. I was going to stay in shape. And over a period of 2-3 years, I finally stopped. I couldn't do it anymore. Chronic weakness, just overwhelming, just no energy whatsoever. And I ran anyway. And finally, I got to the point where if you're a Marine, you never stop running. But what I did is I ran shorter distances. And finally, I got to where I said I can't do this anymore. Extreme muscle pain to this day. Extreme fatigue to this day. Okay, run forward here. Skin problems got worse. I have these red bumps that never disappear from my skin, mostly on my upper torso. They get inflamed, they get hard, very intensely painful, intensely itchy, no pus inside, they're very dry. I submitted for the record a couple of punch biopsies. One of them came back from the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology as possible cutaneous lupus. They were, I understand, very intrigued with my sample, according to my doctor at LA Air Force Base. Those reports are on the record there. I began seeing a rheumatologist in 2005, and it was, after a couple of months, he said I had undifferentiated connective tissue disorder. And this is, again, during the time my muscle and muscle pain and weakness were really getting bad. I've tried the Flexeril, the gabapentin, the Lyrica. They all give me brain fog. I know what brain fog is. I cannot tolerate those drugs. There's three drugs I take now that make me functional. The drug I take for alertness is Concerta. It's a time-release form of Ritalin. I take it in the morning, 27 milligrams. Gets me through the day most of the time. For pain, the only thing that works for me for pain, and this is what makes me mad with most veterans of the VA, they won't give out Vicodin. I have a private doctor, thank God I'm a retiree, I can use TRICARE. I use Vicodin, okay, and it resolves my pain, and I'm not delirious, I can still function. So Vicodin, Concerta, the other drug I take, thanks to Dr. Braniak at Georgetown, tried me on it during a study a couple of years ago. It's called clonazepam. It's an anti-seizure medication. I was getting intense twitching in my anal sphincter, in my abdomen, in my legs, and all, to the point at night where it would go into extreme painful contractions and cramps. Since I've been on the Klonopin, not a problem. Those three drugs, Klonopin, Vicodin, and Concerta, those are my miracle drugs. I'm 100% rated by the VA, and that's another thing that pisses me off. Here I am drawing my pension. I got a pension from the city. You know, I've got Social Security disability. I've got my VA, and I got my Marines who were right alongside me in Kuwait, who are 40 years old and can't work anymore and don't have any benefits from the VA because the majority of disability claims submitted by Gulf War veterans are denied. And I say that loudly because I want the people from the VA behind me to hear me. That's why we need to diagnose this. We need to make it something that the doctors, civilian doctors, when you look at them and say Gulf War illness, they look at you with glassy eyes. It's even worse at the VA. There's a conspiracy at the VA. If you say Gulf War, you're sent to the psych ward. Okay, they sent me to the psych. I didn't ask for any PTSD evaluations or anything. I went up there and I talked to the lady and she said, yeah, you're depressed. You know why you're depressed? Because and I have a report to prove it. She says it's more than, as likely as not, that your mild dyspnea, they call it depression, is because of all the physiological problems you're having to deal with. Amen, brother. Yes, we have psychological problems. They're not caused by the illness. I mean, the illness doesn't cause, I can't say, you know what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that, yes, we have depression, some people have the PTSD. I didn't get in close-to-close combat. I never put in for PTSD. I am depressed, but more than anything, I'm upset that I have 700 Gulf War veterans on my Facebook page. It's a closed group. You have to join. I have to approve. I'm the only guy that approves members. 700, and with the vast majority, their claims have been denied. They have all these symptoms we talked about. We've been getting their runaround for 20 years, and I am sick of it. And I'll tell you something else I'm sick of, and this is to all of my generals and my colonels and all my people that got out of the Gulf War and wrote books and became famous. You know, where the hell are you people? I don't see any of those people in any of these meetings for the last 20 years. Okay, and I'm calling out my fellow officers to stand up and, you know, it's called Semper Fi, always faithful, and that's what it means, always. Okay, and enough is enough. Let's get this thing identified, let's get the compensation out there, and let's get some treatments on the table where people can at least have a quality of life that's reliable. I'm going off the path here, but I'm just, you know. The other thing I'll close with is I went to an allergist about a year ago, and I'm allergic to about 20 different things that I was never allergic to before. Shellfish, peanut butter, or peanuts, dairy products, eggs, all of that stuff I'm allergic to now. Where'd that come from? Okay? So I'm going to end my testimony by saying that I place a whole lot of hope and trust in this committee and hope that the outcome means that we have a definition that clinicians all over this country can refer to in medical publications, and more importantly, that the VA doctors are trained in this definition and trained not to immediately send people to psych ward when they start talking about their experiences in the Gulf War. This is a real problem, and frankly, I think the department has spent behind the VA's pushback all these years. I think they don't want to be talking about things like depleted uranium. They don't want to admit that we are the ones that provided Saddam Hussein in the late 80s with the chemical and biological capabilities that he used against the Iranians. You know, this is what this is all about. It's a cover-up from day one, and I'm sick of it, and I'm calling these people out, and I'm done.
Thank you, sir. One of my colleagues made a question. I have two. One for you, Captain Winnick. You're a very good example of someone in the service for a long time before being deployed. You did have an episode of pneumonia in your first year. How would you describe your health prior to you being deployed?
My health, the left lower lobe pneumonia happened the first year I was in. That was resolved, although it was misdiagnosed, so it got really bad, so I developed some very heavy scar tissue in the left lower lobe. In '87, which was, how many years, 7 or 8, 10 years later, I was running one day and I began bleeding. I was was diagnosed with a chronic bronchiectasis and hemoptysis of the left lower lobe. I was in the hospital in Balboa for 3 weeks, and they put me on a med board, which means they were looking at discharging me. I was non-deployable. He said if it bled 3 times in the period of 1 year, and he said if it bleeds one more time, we're going to remove your left lower lobe and retire you from active duty. Thankfully, it never bled and has not bled to that day, but I had at least twice a year I get pneumonia. So 3 years later, after my hemoptysis and that resolved, I found myself in the middle of 700 burning oil wells. Now, whether or not that exacerbated my breathing problems, I don't know. I don't take an issue with that because I'm 100% rate for all this other stuff. But I'll tell you something. I finished number 2 out of 59 students in the staff academy at El Toro, and I came out at the top 10% of my 250-member class at Quantico, Virginia. That means I could run, I could do a lot of heavy Marine Corps-related physical activities. So to answer your question, I was in tip-top shape. Granted, I was 36, 37 years old, but I was a guy out in front of leading my pack on PTs on, running 3 miles, 8 miles, whatever. I was in top shape. What's ruined my life is the muscle pain and the fatigue. Okay, and that's why I kept running. I kept pushing myself, and I really think that I actually delayed the onset of my symptoms by pushing myself physically. And then you have the muscle memory thing and all that. And this thing as to onset, some people got sick in theater, and my symptoms came on gradually. I strongly believe there's a genetic answer to that question, and I also strongly believe you're going to see more than 250,000 of our 697 or whatever, they're going to get sick in the years to come. But I definitely, just based on what I've seen with CDMRP, there's a genetic...
You had 2 hospitalizations prior to service for the lung problem too.
Correct. But they were significant, but they did resolve, and I'm award. Thank you.
And Mr. Hardy, you was very clear on discussing the 3 definitions, Picard, Haley, and Seal. I wondered if you would comment in a little more detail as to, you said Picard was too broad. What do you mean by that? I'm just curious as to your assessment, and similarly with Haley. You looked at all 3. We're going to hear I hope, from Dr. Seal, but I would like to get your impression of those other 2.
Thank you for that question, for the clarification. The Fukuda study, the Kansas definition, in my opinion, incorporates, has more symptoms, lists more, it's more detailed.
As I recall, you had 3 domains, so in contrast with some others, which have had 5 or 6 domains, there was a relatively lower number of domains. Some of them had multiple symptoms associated with it. Is it that part which you find specific?
I found, for me, looking at the Kansas definition, there are simply just more, it lists more of symptoms, and that I'm not able to be specific without looking at it in front of me. I'm not able to recall them off the top of my head. The point that I was really, besides the fact that to me, when I look at all 3, the Kansas definition fits more with what we're dealing with, but I also recognize it doesn't grapple with the neurologic issues that I'm nodding my head as and David are talking about neurologic issues, these odds in symptoms and so on. They're well explained by neurologic issues. I'm pleased that you've got one of the doctors with you here. I think it's Dr. Ngayan, that's an ALS expert. I think that's very interesting. I'm sorry, Dr. Loman-Hurst. I did have a question for you that I think all Gulf War veterans that are listening here and that are, I don't know whether you'll have an answer for it or not, but that's with a condition here that is clearly physiological. The VA has stated today it's physiological as well. My belief as well is that it's neurologic with immunological dysfunction. I've had comprehensive neurologic testing immunological testing, I don't have deficiency, I have dysfunction, and I suspect that other veterans would experience that. I don't want to go into all the details of that, but with those issues, why are there psychiatric professionals on a panel that's not related to psychiatric issues? Why do we have someone that's on this panel that's the past president of the Academy of Psychosomatic Medicine, that's the internationally acclaimed leader in the field of psychosomatic medicine? veteran. That's insulting. And so my question is why are people like that on a panel that has nothing to do with their areas of expertise?
Let me respond in the following way. I don't want to get into individual memberships. My sense is that in a number of fields of the relationship between the nervous system, the brain, and other parts of the body has evolved to a much greater extent than even 4 or 5 years ago. And the recognition there are relationships which go from the brain to the gastrointestinal tract, from the gastrointestinal tract to the brain. These are interactions which are very physiological, but they do involve multiple organs, and they involve multiple interactions. My understanding of a field like psychosomatic medicine is that that field is also to a much greater extent the relationships that we're talking about. It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is in the field of psychosomatic medicine believes that everything's in your head, or that everything's psychiatric. I think we're looking at fields which are evolving in terms of those relationships. I do not believe that the presence on a committee of someone who is in the field of psychosomatic medicine necessarily in any way determines that means that this is a psychiatric illness. That is not I don't think that's an appropriate conclusion to draw. Beyond that, good scientists are going to look at evidence wherever that is. My sense is, from talking to members of this committee in a very extensive discussion this morning, you have a lot of very good people coming to it from a variety of fields.
Welcome to Reservation with Plus conferencing. Enter your conference code.
Cut the phone.
I think it's not appropriate to draw any conclusions about how any one of them is going to appropriate. Incidentally, one of the things that's characteristic
Dave, please cut the phone.
Committee is that members of committee
I don't have a phone on right now.
the organizations with which they're associated. They're independent players. They don't go back to their organization and discuss their position. They don't represent those organizations. They represent their own intellectual contribution. And I think that you will see all the members of this committee that I'm familiar with doing exactly that, without any bias, if you will, as to what the final conclusion should be other than that sentence.
I appreciate those words. I hope that members of this committee also recognize that there's a long history here of, and with good reason, of distrust of federal entities with regards to Gulf War veterans. VA has still yet to get it right. Thankfully, the Gulf War Illness CDMRP program exists. But it's with deep concern when we see panelists with those not hear what you're saying. But I also recognize that the Gulf War veterans that are out there that are aware of these issues are all going to share that kind of concern.
I recognize the concern that you reflect, but for us to take a multidisciplinary look at a very complicated problem and say you have the remotest connection with something someone will find not relevant that you're not going to serve is, I think, betrayal of the notion that if you find good, committed people who are good scientists, good physicians, committed to trying to do the right thing, that I hope that we'll come out with the right answers. But I think that I think that you may be, as I indicated before, misinterpreting what individuals' possession of concepts are, or in fact the way the field is evolving, in a way that may not, in fact, bring out what you want. We're running very late. We've got 2 more panels to hear on. I want to emphasize that it's very important. We heard from particularly Ms. McLam and Ms. Nichols and Captain Winnick. I would call you by your range sections. I don't know what they were. in any case, to some extent, we're dealing with some conceptual issues in terms of what's the evidence, how does the data come up, what are the definitions, and so forth. But I think that the importance of hearing from you is that we constantly have to be reminded of why we're doing this. And it's not just because of some intellectual exercise or a compensation issue per se. It's about what's the right thing to do for people that serve the country. So for your service, we're very grateful, and all I can do is promise you that we will do our very best. We're going to have to go to it. Thank you. Why don't we go to the next panel? If people need to take a bio break, let's go ahead and do that.